Claude Monet is 158 years old.
Happy birthday, dear Claude Monet!
He's the world's most popular painter, and for many, he's a way of life.
The whole idea of the salon really was to make it feel like you was in a Monet painting. We've got flowers everywhere, continental colours on the walls. You know, it smells nice, it looks nice, it's bright, it's vibrant, it's welcoming. It's as if you're in the picture, really.
Various people have problems with what I do because you can never be the real thing. But they seem to misunderstand that there's demand for what I do. Monet's dead, I'm alive, I'm producing his work for him, so to speak, and it pays my mortgage.
$770,000 for a good Monet landscape was a real bargain. Whereas many people would want a summer residence or a fancy automobile, to me, to be 39 years of age and own a great Monet was the ultimate.
I think it may seem at times as if the world has gone Monet mad, and you do wonder whether there is some kind of collective insanity at work.
Monet mania has just descended on London's Royal Academy, with over 500,000 visitors anticipated for their latest show. They know what to expect. It all happened in Boston before Christmas.
Oh, I've never seen a turnout like this before in such an exhibit like this. It's been really, really busy. People just love Monet.
It's been phenomenal. It really has exceeded all our expectations. A blockbuster, I can't deny it.
Hello, I'm Claude Monet.
I really don't think that Monet has ever been more popular. I think that Monet is great box office. Monet is a surefire commercial winner.
Monet's popular because everybody gets it. He doesn't lecture you, he doesn't show you things that upset you. All artists have their agenda, and what drove him was this compulsion to communicate the beauty of the outside world.
Monet spent 70 years and 2,000 canvases trying to capture simply what he saw. As one of the leading artists of the Impressionist movement, he brought art out of the studio and into the open air. He lived his whole life along the River Seine, trying to capture the shifting moods of the landscape. But as an old man, almost blind, he retreated to his own back garden at Giverny. Here, in the last decades of his life, he focused almost exclusively on his lily pond, producing images which now hang in millions of homes around the world.
I think people think of Monet in very simplistic fashions. He's a painter of beautiful pictures. He's someone who pursued light and color with a kind of passion and self-abandonment. But in fact, he's a much more complicated artist and a much more complicated man than traditionally believed.
Monet was born in Paris in 1840, but grew up on the Normandy coast. He was a mischievous child who hated school, preferring to play by the sea and wander along the cliff tops.
Monet's family came up to the Normandy coast when he was very young, and so he spent all his formative years up in this extraordinary light and buffeted by this sort of wind. But in fact, his first work that he did as an artist wasn't painting nature, but instead it was drawing caricatures, silly sketches of local dignitaries. And it was only when he was about 16 or 17 or so that he met a local landscape painter called Boudin, who took him out of doors and actually showed him nature, introduced him to the possibilities that you could actually paint what we see around us here. And he said that that was a moment that a veil was torn from his eyes, and that was his future destiny laid out in front of him.
Monet resolved to become a painter. He set off to study in Paris in 1859, against the wishes of his father and without his financial support. Monet was captivated by the capital and spent much of his time in cafes and bistros with his fellow students, Renoir, Sisley and Basile. They rejected the style of painting favoured by the Paris Salon, the main forum for artists to display and sell their work.
The Paris Salon was a hodgepodge, really, in the 1860s. The most famous and charismatic pictures were traditional, historical, mythological, religious subjects, often painted in a very traditional neoclassical style. But there were also enormous numbers of pictures of the French countryside, solemn peasants working in the fields, or big landscapes of remote corners of France. Pictures that totally ignored the modern world, and also pictures that were almost always painted in the studio. Monet and his friends felt that it made no sense at all to paint history. Painting should be about direct experience, painting should be about the here and now, and that the real history that they were trying to capture was the history of ordinary people's lives in the modern world.
Monet became fascinated by the new world of leisure. At a rather risque pleasure spot, he even painted ladies in bathing costumes. He began a relationship with his model Camille, and in 1867, she gave birth to his son, Jean. Though she was rejected by Monet's family, they were married in 1870 and set up home further down the River Seine, in the suburb of Argenteuil.
Argenteuil was really a place where nature had been messed up and spoiled by traditional standards, by the factory chimneys, by the railway trains crossing the brand new railway bridge, by people just hanging out there recreationally. It was a place that was very much in a state of change and flux, and it went against all the conventions of contemporary landscape painting, and this seemed a very shocking vision.
Rejected by the Salon, Monet and his friends organised an exhibition of their own. One of his paintings was to give the group their name.
Monet himself said it couldn't be described as a view, so he called it an impression. And the term came to be used as a negative term by critics. And they said, these are all impressionists, these people. They're just painting these quick sketches, not properly finished pictures. Putting something like this on the wall and saying this is a finished work of art, that looked like a sort of insult to the craft of the painter. It was just a mess. It was a travesty of what paintings were meant to look like.
I suppose the first time when I saw Monet really was in Athena. I was looking for an idea for a salon, and I brought 3 Monet paintings. There was Giverny, there was Lily Pads and the Poppies. Them 3 paintings really were the basis of the shop. We built the shop around the paintings, really. I grew up on a council estate just at the back end of Burton. I was never really into art as a kid or anything, really. And I've never really seen a real Monet painting. All I've seen is posters, prints, calendars. But it would be a dream to see one in the flesh. I think the customers love it. You know, it's their sort of cup of tea. Yeah, we've got Nell, you know, one of our oldest customers, but we hope that she's happy here. We hope you are, anyway.
Oh, I like it. I like the way you put the flowers in and the pictures. You make a nice job of my hair as well.
I think it's the best hairdresser in town. I've tried a few of the others, and it doesn't seem to have the personal touch that you get with Jason. Most of their places are just drab places, but this has actually got a bit of atmosphere to it.
Good afternoon, Monet Hairdressing. I relate myself a little bit to him. I suppose I'm no Mr. Monet, but Monet's really changed my life in a lot of ways. Now I've got a fantastic shop in the middle of the town centre. So really the whole place is a tribute to him and to what he inspired us to do.
Monet's paintings of industrial life were not selling, and times were hard. Help came from wealthy patrons, Ernest Horchaday and his wife Alice. When Ernest went bankrupt, the two families decided to pool their meagre resources and share a house in the secluded hamlet of Verteuil.
He had a real problem. He wasn't making money. And he must have realized that painting an old village down by the river, a much more traditional subject, was going to help him to sell better. And increasingly, I think he was fascinated by ways of seeing, about trying to explore his own eyesight, his own ways of visualizing, and his own ways simply of looking at the world around him. And down here on the riverbanks, he seems to have explored an enormous range of different sorts of visual experience, trying to convey natural textures in the most exciting way.
But soon after moving to Verteuil, Camille fell gravely ill after the birth of their second son, Michel. As his wife lay dying in front of him, Monet painted her. He said as he worked, he hardly saw her. He only saw the colors fading from her face.
Here is this poor young woman dying in front of Monet's eyes and not being able ever to know that all that effort, all that strain, all that frustration that she and he must have experienced together would, in due course, pay off.
Lot 19, at the Monet, at $3 million, at $3 million, $3,500,000, $4 million I have, $4 million, $5 million now.
Monet is money. It's not spelled M-O-N-E-T, it's spelled M-O-N-E-Y.
The best things in life are free, but you can give them to the birds and bees. I want money.
Last summer, a Japanese bridge painting sold for a record-breaking price.
Lot number 6, the Monet.
There was this tremendous electricity in the room, which there always is when a major lot is being offered. And 3 or 4 people were bidding immediately, so the price rose very quickly.
At £7,800,000. £8 million now.
And when it actually reached £9.5 million, we were feeling pretty ecstatic because this was really well above our expectations. But at £9.5 million, something even more extraordinary happened. Another bidder came in, and the bidding rose through 10, 11, 12, 13.
£14 million now.
When it got to 14, it passed the world record price for any Monet ever.
At £18 million. You sure? Do you want me to have a word with him? No?
And the hammer fell at £18 million.
18 million.
And one did think at the end of that, well, what would have happened if one of those guys had woken up with a headache that morning and hadn't bothered to compete? Then the price would only have been 9.5 million rather than 18 million. So there is this tremendous element of chance in prices at auction. One's image of Monet is constantly being subverted by the money, I find. And I remember very well a wonderful Monet of poplars. The more I looked at it, the less I saw it for what it was, which was this wonderful, sinuous S of receding trees. And the more I saw it simply as a dollar sign. Monet is a magnet to new wealth. And in the nicest possible way, a Monet is a status symbol. Owning a Monet is simultaneously a badge of tremendous cultural distinction and enormous personal wealth, so it's a very satisfactory combination.
There aren't many people who can afford the real thing, but in Boston's financial district, a highly successful business has enabled one man to indulge his passion for Monet.
About 24 times expected earnings, and although some of the small cap stocks have been hit, there's some really good values left. Thank you. I'm in the investment management business. I started Delphi at the end of 1979 with one client, and we've grown the business nicely. With really no marketing, we have roughly $1 billion in assets. I made my first million in 1985, and rather than spending on a fast automobile or a ski chalet, I was interested in buying a Claude Monet. To me, it symbolized true genius, and I was 39 years of age, and I spent 77% or $770,000 of my liquid net worth to buy the painting. I did not grow up wealthy, but I did know of Monet as a youngster. My mother and father had reproductions on the wall. But to be honest, given my economic circumstances, I never expected in my wildest dreams ever to own a real Monet. Now, this afternoon, I'm going to go up to Portland, Maine to visit my two Monets. I grew up in Portland, and I get a great deal of pleasure out of loaning it into the small Portland Museum of Art. And it's like giving back to the community. In fact, one of the real joys is to watch other people watching my paintings. And I don't go up to them and say, that's my painting, but it's interesting to see their reaction. This is the first painting that I bought, the Vue de Cap Martin, Monaco, 1884. When I first saw the painting and was actually hanging on the rack in the vault in Christie, I said, this is a beautiful Monet. It was pristine. It was as if it had dried yesterday out of Giverny in his studio. When I got the painting, obviously I was elated, but you can't stand up and cheer in the second row of Christie's, but that's what I was feeling internally. But later, when I left the auction room, I actually cried, and I said to myself, gee, this is like the Lifetime Achievement Award. God forbid if I went bankrupt. I do have 31 paintings. The other 29 might be for sale, but the two Monets stay in the family into perpetuity. And I'm not finished yet. I'm still in my early 50s. I figure I got another 14 to 20 years of good collecting, so I hope there are a couple more Monet landscapes in my future.
I hope so, Scott. You can't go wrong. I can think of other things that you could buy that you could go wrong with. Scott and I don't necessarily agree on everything that he buys. We often do, but not always.
But we normally agree on Claude Monet.
Always.
It's auction week in New York, and Scott is hoping to add another Monet to his collection.
One of the things I always do is I examine the condition of the painting to see if it's been restored. And if there were a major area of restoration, obviously that would be a deal breaker because you want to buy an original Monet, not an original restoration.
So let's have a look with the ultraviolet light. And I find that central area pretty good, isn't it? There's hardly anything.
Only a couple touches of in-painting on the
That's
center.
right. Those little black spots there are more recent paint, probably restorers touching in. Well, I think that's it. I think that's pretty good news. I think it's a lovely picture and great state.
I agree with you. I think it's in beautiful condition.
And the interesting thing is it used to belong to Frank Sinatra, which is, I think, a fascinating little extra dimension to it.
I'm always nervous before any major auction because it's not every day you get to spend a couple $1 million. I hope I'm going to get it. I love the painting. I'll be an aggressive bidder as I always am, but you never know on a given evening what will happen in the sales room.
Lot 54. Lot 54, the Monet. $1,200,000 for this. 1,200,000, 1,300,000 now. 1,400,000, 1,500,000, 1,600,000, 1,700,000. At 1,700,000, 1,800,000 I have. 1,800,000 at the desk, 1,800,000. Nope, at $1,800,000. Any advance of 1,800,000?
When it got back to me at $1.8 million, I figured that was a full price, so I let it go. It's a beautiful painting, and I congratulate the winner. And there's always another Monet, and there's always another auction.
$2,200,000. $2,200,000 it is.
The painting Scott lost came out of an exceptional decade for Monet, the 1880s.
He went all over France, painting a whole range of different sorts of landscapes. But he was also trying to paint the extremes of weather. He was trying to paint stormy seas. He was trying to paint the rain, trying to make himself feel he could conquer nature in some sort of way and get it all down on canvas, even when it was incredibly difficult. His worst day at Etretat was when he misread the tide tables and very nearly got washed away. Apparently the waves came up and splattered him against the stones, and he ended up with his paint all over his face, struggling out of the waves. And he said he was very lucky not to have been washed away and actually swept to his death. Monet often said he never had a studio. In fact, he was telling lies. We know he did. But he made a great point of getting journalists to watch him painting out of doors in very extreme conditions. He wanted to create the myth of himself as the great natural artist who was about as close to the nature he was painting as he could possibly be.
Monet was a great marketeer, and he was his own PR person. That is certainly true. I think that he is someone who is both savvy about the market and very careful to be able to construct a kind of vision of himself that he wanted to project. He knew the public wanted a particular kind of mythology, and he fed it to them beautifully.
While he was on his painting expeditions, Monet yearned to be back in the new home he'd found in the village of Giverny. Monet discovered Giverny in 1883. He came here with Alice Horchadet, who'd been deserted by her husband. The two families settled in an abandoned cider farm in the heart of the village. As his work began to sell, he could afford to indulge his other great passion, gardening.
Monet said that if he had not been a painter, he would have been a botanist, and that it was in fact flowers that led him to becoming an artist. It is these flowers which are like the dabbles of paint upon his own palette. And it was ultimately a place that he makes into a kind of Eden, where nature itself is going to be controlled by the human. Formerly, of course, allowing it to have its own drama, he now can be the conductor of that symphony.
Monet was very influenced by a trip he took to Holland about 5 years before he made this garden, in which he saw laid out all the tulips in bloom in great sort of massive swatches of color across the landscape. And I think when he came here, he wanted to create that effect.
He laid it out along the lines of strict geometric patterns, with a long alley that runs right down from the center of his house, and then on either side, the beds laid out crisply and clearly with strong rectilinear shapes filled with flowers that would bloom over the course of the seasons, so that the colors themselves, hot against cold, would in fact create a kind of visual intensity to the garden that would be like the intensity that he attempted to achieve in his painting.
While his garden grew, the surrounding Giverny countryside inspired Monet's next project. Working on several canvases at once, he attempted to capture the changing envelope of light around the subject.
We're right on the spot where Monet painted his Poplar series, one of the most famous of the series. He came down here one day and found that the trees had been marked up for felling, and he paid to have them left standing for long enough for him to capture the light going through these leaves and the branches and the reflections in the river, and then after that, they were obliterated. He said that the light changed so frequently that he needed a new canvas every 7 minutes because the light had moved off a particular leaf. Of course, this all made life, in fact, completely impossible. And we know that towards the end, he had 20, 30 canvases sometimes heaped around him, and he used to scrummage around among this pile in order to find one that matched the effect that he was actually seeing in front of him. And by the time he got it on the easel, the effect had gone. So it was a real struggle to keep up with nature. One day he got so frustrated that he just threw all his equipment, canvas, easel, the whole lot, into the river, went off back home, and then thought, oh God, you know, and came back, fished it all out again, started all over again. And at times he really wanted to give up the whole business of painting. He said it was just a crazy, mad thing to do.
He was very tough He was known as somebody very difficult. The tradition is that when Monet was furious about a certain number of what he had made, he asked ritually, I can say, to the gardeners to take these paintings that he didn't like and to burn them. A big fire in the garden, you know. This was the only way to burn them.
Monet and Elise married in 1892. The life of their household revolved around a routine of monastic strictness.
He's a man who gets up very early for his work, 4:30 according to the season. And the first thing he does is just to look at the sky. He's a kind of peasant, you know. He needs beautiful weather. He needs light for his work. So he would be very, very ill-tempered if the weather was bad and won't paint. Some days he would feel so desperate and so distressed and so depressed that he would go back to bed and stay, and nobody would approach him. And also the next day, he would recover and be all right, excellent mood, singing very nice little songs, and he would apologize and saying, "You know me, and I feel so sorry." This is Monet's studio. This is the first studio he had, and he had 3 studios. If he couldn't go outside because of the light, he was finishing inside his work, and he didn't want to be disturbed. He hated to be disturbed. And if people were coming without any appointment, he would really not receive them. Meal times were extremely strict in this house, like in a monastery. 11:30 for lunch, 7 o'clock sharp for dinner. And nobody would have been allowed to any delay. He hated stupid people, and he hated people being late.
Food, drink, good company, hospitality was absolutely basic to Monet. And he loved to have friends around to dinner who came and had an impeccable meal served by a range of servants, cooked by a range of cooks. Food was as important to Monet as his gardens, and he cultivated his kitchen just as carefully as he cultivated his gardens. Monet accumulated his own cookbook of recipes from his travels, and he loved extremes of contrasts in tastes. For a first course, maybe seafood from the Normandy coast, where he himself came from, but then combined with a Mediterranean spice like saffron. And then the second course, duck, but then duck combined with figs. And then he even had recipes for Yorkshire pudding that he brought with him back from the Savoy Hotel. He was fascinated by varieties and extremes of taste, just like he was of varieties and extremes of visual experience, all presented in a way that kept up this image of a person who lived life to the highest standards in terms of all the pleasures of life.
At the turn of the century, the artist made 3 visits to London and stayed at the newly built Savoy Hotel. Inspired by Turner and Whistler, Monet pursued an ambition to paint the effects of mist on the Thames.
Monet came here in the winter because he loved the fog. He found the fog an extraordinary set of effects, changing in colour every single minute. And it was this that drew him here. He said he didn't understand how Victorian painters could paint every brick in the buildings here because you simply couldn't see those bricks. The paintings are all really about coloured mist. There's a long sequence of variations in colour. Sometimes the forms are almost invisible. Sometimes there's a sharp sunlight coming through the mist. Sometimes it's just scattered and diffused into sort of coloured harmonies all over the surface of the canvas. But all of them are improvisations based on this extraordinary effect of fog. He took the pictures back home to Giovanni, and a journalist found out that he was working away at them 2, 3, 4 years after he'd last been in London. And in fact, when the pictures are finally exhibited, they have dates on them like 1903, 1904, 1905, which are years he wasn't here. And so he had to issue an indignant denial, saying it was nobody's business what he did, and he was absolutely not going to have it put in print, that so much was actually done in the studio.
When he returned from London, Monet no longer felt the need to search away from home for new motifs. In his own back garden, a project was taking shape which would absorb him for the last 26 years of his life.
Monet's water gardens are really quite extraordinary experiment because he built his own natural landscape. After exploring all over France looking for landscapes through his career, he came back home and decided that the best way to control nature was actually to create it for himself.
It was thanks to a horticulturist named Joseph Bory Latour Marliac that Monet discovered the water lily.
Joseph Bory Latour Marliac collected up all the naturally occurring wild water lily varieties from around the world in one place. He was the first man to do that. He took the pollen from one parent, mixed it with the nectar of another, and he created an explosion, a veritable jewel box of colors with pinks, reds, yellows that had not existed in the water gardening world before. So he actually transformed the face of water gardening. Water lilies can be tricky little devils in a way because they want the conditions just right to do their best performance. So without the intensity of a good, bright sunlight, they will not open their petals. And on cloudy and dull days, they'll pout. They don't always want to open. I think water lilies are fairly irresistible to anyone who's encountered them. The color range of the flowers is like a special magic box that opens up before you, revealing all these glistening colors. The scent is subtle but beautiful. And also that sort of mystical habit they have of disappearing completely in the winter and then re-emerging in the spring and summer to give such a magnificent display. All those things combined inspire me.
The first pictures of the garden are really just views of the garden with the bridge in the middle and flowers and foliage and trees round it. Then he gradually moves back and looks down into the water surface. The horizon then appears just at the top, and then he abandons the horizon altogether, and we're simply looking down into the surface of the water and watching the play of reflections. And there in the water he finds the world of sky and clouds, really a whole universe. In a sense, we're just tightly in this little and in some ways very intimate garden. But then you look down into the surface of the water and everything opens out into this huge, great, almost cosmic space.
The inspiration for the whole of this landscape really came from Monet's example. Monet created a beautiful garden to paint in. He enjoyed these wonderful landscapes, and we wanted here very much to create so many elements of Monet's work and his paintings and the things that inspired him. This is very much the centrepiece of our project here at Patchings, our very own Monet Bridge. We got the original photographs of Monet standing on his bridge, and then we got an engineer to do some drawings for us. We got a local Newstead Abbey joinery firm to make it up for us, a crane to lower it over, and here it is for people to enjoy and paint, just as was done 100 years ago nearly. We're having a little bit of a problem with the water lilies acclimatising to the area, because obviously the climate is so much different from Giverny. It's quite an exposed site, so the wind sort of rushes on them, but they're beginning just to take hold nicely. So we're not at paradise yet, but we're on our way. Paradise is not always that easy to achieve. We have had quite a few problems on our way. The Grand Allée, the seeds are there, it's planted out. Had a few problems with the nasturtiums though. They don't like the wind very much. But it's patience, isn't it? It's slowly working at it and cutting them back and replanting. And eventually, you know that glorious bed of nasturtiums at Giverny that is so lovely, lovely spread of colour to paint, that will be here in a few years' time. In order to make our site complete, we had to have the Monet haystack, which is, I think, so symbolic of many of Monet's paintings. And once we got it built, you could realise just how Monet enjoyed painting it as the light hits it during different times of the day.
Monet captures moments that only he could have put on canvas. And you sit and you look at it and you think, how the devil did he do that? I would like to be able to paint like Monet. But the thing is, nobody ever can, because he was a genius. And all you can do is try your best to sort of capture the light playing on the scene, rather than just trying to paint the scene. And I'm not doing it very well, but that's what I'm trying to do. But, oh, he's superb. It really is. How he used to do it outside with the equipment there, I don't know. Because look at this. Oh, dear. Not a day for painting.
There is a man who's made it his business to perfect Monet's technique.
I'm a painter. I specialise in making copies and pastiches of old masters, and by popular demand, the Impressionists. Particularly Monet. Everybody loves Monet. Painting a Monet is not easy. It wasn't easy for him, it's certainly not easy for me. People think Impressionism is about slapping paint all over the place. It certainly would have given that impression if you saw Monet painting the initial stages of a painting. He would have used a large, broad brush and established the tones of a picture with great broad sweeps of turkey colour. Then he'd slow down. One of the distinctive things about Monet's brushwork is his long comma-like dashes that he built up over the whole surface of a painting in different colours and tones. The profession of copyist and pasticheur has a very long, honourable tradition going back in history a long way. But the trouble is nowadays people think, oh no, it can't be done. And I get a lot of friction from the powers that be who say this is really not on and even a threat sometimes to their livelihood. My work has, on a couple of occasions, been mistaken for the genuine article. I got into a right pickle a few years ago when some idiot bought a painting of mine and tried to pass it off in the market, and I had the police banging on the door and all that sort of stuff. It's very alarming because it's a very serious business, and I don't want to get my legs broken by anybody. People often think it's very glamorous to be sort of involved in fakes and forgeries and all this sort of stuff, but the real world of fakes and forgeries is actually very, very unpleasant. It's like any other valuable commodity, drugs or guns or anything. It's worth a lot of money, and so people get very angry and very upset. And the worst thing that can happen is, I suppose, you just disappear. It did happen to a forger in Belgium once. He just vanished, and I presume he's swimming with the fishes, as the mafia say.
Money makes the world go around, the world go around, the world go around. Money makes the world go around, it makes the world go round.
It's not just fakes and reproductions that are in high demand. The Monet brand can sell anything.
If you happen to be rich and to feel like a night entertainment, you can pay for a gay escapade. If you happen to be rich bridge all alone, and you need a companion you can ring.
Monet is the biggest thing that's ever happened to us. Just keeping the shelves full is an adventure every single day. We have a tremendous range of Monet merchandise. You name it, we've got it.
This is Philippe the Frog. He lives in Monet's garden, one of our top sellers in the store. He's very popular with the children. Along with Philippe, you can also purchase a frog in the soap, which little kids are going for, because once the soap melts, you can get the frog. This is Monet's palette and chocolate that we sell in the gift shop. It's one of our very popular items that we sell of candy. Along with this, we also sell Monet's painting of the Japanese bridge, painted in confectioner's sugar on a block of chocolate. We've even got Monet's fragrance, very popular with the older ladies, supposed to smell like Monet's garden. It's a little bit strong for me, but we've sold quite a few bottles of this very popular gift idea.
Some people think that Monet would turn over in his grave if he came in here today. I don't think so. I think Monet would be really pleased that all of his work could be extended to the wonderful product that we have in the store. And I bet you that he'd take home Philippe the Frog, who was created out of Monet's garden and is one of our best sellers.
In the early years of this century, Monet gained fame and fortune around the world, but at home, a series of tragedies struck. The death of his stepdaughter Suzanne was followed by that of his son Jean in 1914. But perhaps most tragic for him was the death of Alice in 1911.
Monet stopped painting for 2 years. And then, as his flowers began to bloom in his Giverny garden in the spring of 1914, he took up the largest project of his entire career, attempting to realize the idea of creating paintings that would surround the walls in single rooms to immerse viewers in the beauties and glories of his garden. And those pictures really arise from tragedy. And of course, they begin in 1914 when he's 73 years old, when the guns of August will tear its terrible thunder across Europe as a whole.
The guns could be heard in Giverny, only a short distance from the front, and soldiers, on their way to and from the trenches, passed through the village. Stubborn as ever, Monet refused to leave his home, saying he would rather die in front of his paintings. With the world in turmoil around him, he retreated to his studio.
When he's there at home working on these paintings, he's terribly worried. He's worried about his son, he's worried about the people dying at the front, he's worried about the meaning in his own life. As he writes in one letter, he says, how can I possibly be involved with such mundane matters as a choice of color or brushwork when people are dying for this country? And thus, when we look at these water lily paintings, we have to realize that they are imbued with the terrors and the traumas of that moment. He attacks the painting with a kind of determination to allow all rules to be cast aside. Colors become very intense or very brooding. The paint quite literally slices through the canvas. Forms are at each other's throats, so to speak, and in certain instances, there appears to be almost no order, much like the ways in which the world itself seems to have been thrown.
When victory came, Monet's compassion for the suffering of his fellow citizens prompted him to write to his old friend, Prime Minister Georges Clemenceau, to offer his great water lily panels as a gift to France. But the artist was frequently tempted to give up the whole project. He was tormented by something he feared more than death, the loss of his sight through cataracts.
A cataract is cloudiness or opacity of the lens inside the eye. It's like looking through a ground glass window or out of your shower door. You can't see through it well, and it's hard to function. One other problem with cataracts that may well have been quite significant for Monet is that as the lens becomes cloudier and denser it also becomes more yellow. It's like looking through a yellow filter. The world appears a different color. Monet complained that his vision was becoming more blurred. But what I think bothered him more is that his vision was becoming less clear for colors. He felt that he could no longer recognize the colors on his palette, and he had assistants place the paint on the palette in a specific order so that he would know which color was where. This had a real effect on his paintings. A number of the works show a great loss of detail. They're very abstract, and they show very striking colors, tending to be predominantly orange, brown, red, or predominantly green-blue. He became very disturbed by the change of color sense in some of his paintings, and he destroyed many canvases.
Though cataracts had been diagnosed as early as 1912, Monet was terrified of surgery for fear of losing his sight altogether. It wasn't until 1923 that he finally had an operation.
He was a terrible patient. During the primary cataract operation, he was nervous, he threw up, much to the consternation of the doctor. Monet did not want to lie still. He said, "I'd rather go blind than have my eyes patched." His friends had to restrain him. Finally, he got through the procedure.
It took Monet more than a year after surgery before he once again felt comfortable with the colors in his world. Nevertheless, he would not allow the water lily murals to be displayed until after his death. Monet died in November 1926, aged 86. The following year, his work was installed in two specially designed oval rooms in the Orangerie at the Tuileries Gardens in Paris.
The architecture of the Orangerie has been conceived by Monet himself. He once has said that he would like the visitor to feel as if he had been immersed in an aquarium, a flowered aquarium, he said. Constantly surrounded by painting, one had to dive in something fluid and boundless.
When the Orangerie opened in 1927, it was a failure. In fact, in the 1930s, the French government wanted to take the paintings off the wall. And all the way through to the 1950s, Monet's late work, the marvelous pictures in the show, were completely disregarded. He was out of sync with the tenor of his time.
By giving them to a permanent museum, he gave them to the public of the future. With a very fine sense of utopia, he knew that this public to come would understand, would appreciate, would love them.
I've never really seen a real Monet painting. All I've seen is posters, prints, calendars. But it would be a dream to see one in the flesh. When I walked into the room, it was just like, wham. Everything was on top of me. My head went one way, my body went the other. I think a print can never, ever produce what this has made me feel, because a print doesn't give me emotions, this has.